All right, what's going on, fellas? This is Hot and Cold Takes number 5, where you guys share with me your controversial strength sports, strength and conditioning, strength training opinions. I give you my thoughts on them, and I let you know whether I think it's a hot or a cold take. Thank you guys for giving me your takes. As always, if you have a take, let's say you're scrolling through Instagram, you see something that most people are agreeing with, and you think, hey, wait a minute, I don't agree with that. I don't think that's true, but everybody seems to be signing off on this. Think a little old Sam, and I will be putting up another one of these pretty soon in the community tab on my channel, where I basically just ask you guys for your controversial opinions for the next one of these. So think of me if you come across something you find is a controversial opinion of yours. So going to work our way through these today. The first one is, I'm not sure how I feel about this one, but Hex Bar Jumps can replace power cleans and Olympic lifts for power development. It is a better alternative for athletes because it has all/similar benefits without the technical aspects. Okay, so I don't know if this is a hot take or a cold take, right? So the initial part that it can replace Olympic lifts, absolutely, right? We're training triple extension, which is the main reason that most athletes would look to something like a power clean, is the fact that we're extending at the hips, knees, and ankles at the same time in a explosive manner to focus on power development. Awesome. That's kind of the reason people do it. We can mimic this with a trap bar jump. So first half of this, absolutely a hot take. That's correct. It's a correct statement. It's a better alternative for athletes because it has all/similar benefits. I would tend to agree without the technical aspects. Yes, so there's a less sharp learning curve to the motion, which is, I think, why a lot of people push back against the use of even power cleans or hang cleans for athletes, is that yes, it's not the hardest thing in the world to learn, but the problem is that most like high schools across America, at least, the strength and conditioning coach for the football team doesn't know how to do a good clean. So he's going to teach these guys how to do a bad clean. And then it's just like, yeah, that is a little overly technically complex if you don't have anyone that knows how to teach it. But if you have someone who knows how to teach a decent clean, I don't think it's the craziest barrier to entry technically, especially if we're talking about like a hang power clean where, our technical demands go down a little bit. But I've heard some people say that, hey, the catch itself in the front rack doesn't offer any significant physiological stimulus. We should probably be looking to do maybe clean pulls because we're getting all the benefits without the catch. That was actually the philosophy of one of the head strength and conditioning guys where I went to college, and I tend to agree with that. I think if you're in a facility that has bumper plates and you're allowed to drop the bars, just doing the pull can be not that technical, offer a lot of the benefits. But a trap bar jump can as well. But the big downside to a trap bar jump is the fact that you have to absorb the impact of landing, which is just additional stress to the hips, knees, and ankles on top of your sport-specific training, which can be an issue. If we look to overload those for power development, so we try to introduce some load, the landing can be a bit of an issue. So that's where I don't think it picks up all of the benefits that a clean might, as far as the ability to overload our power development work. So I would say lukewarm take. Not good, not bad, somewhere in the middle. The next one, most powerlifters who are not at an elite strength level should do some years of bulking/cutting cycles to try to maximize muscle growth instead of staying near their competitive weight year round. I've talked about it many times now, how we do have a little bit of analysis that says that most of the variance in how strong someone is, even as good powerlifters in the squat, bench, and deadlift, can be explained by the cross-sectional area of the primary movers. That is to say that the difference between you and someone who's much better at powerlifting than you is your muscle size, right? And that also being said, the weight class most people begin powerlifting in is not the optimal weight class for their height. So they need to accrue muscle mass with time to become a better powerlifter. I think that is absolutely correct. Hot take. Some guys get tied to this short-term local competitiveness at 165. And they think of themselves as a 165. They cannot imagine themselves as a competitive 181, and they hold back their long-term development when they actually might be, in the long term, a better 181 when they fill out their leverages and gain that muscle mass and get a better height to weight ratio for the weight class. I'm not going to put forward any straightforward guidelines for that because there's a lot of variance. Everybody loves to say, well, what about John Hack? John Hack is not that wide. Well, we look to the rule, not the exception. So the easiest way I've always been told, right? Like Shaiko has some height to weight ratios that he puts out there, but the way that I've always preferred is if you look at like the podium at USAPL or IPF Worlds, USAPL Nationals or IPF Worlds, and everybody in that weight class is shorter than you probably aren't in long-term competitive best weight class for yourself. That being said, some people don't want to get fat. Some people don't want to gain a certain amount of weight. They don't want to walk around in a certain body weight, and that's valid, but you need to acknowledge that's your personal preference for your quality of life, not necessarily the best for your competitive outcome. So, hot take. The next one. Most people I see in the gym are doing way too much bullshit volume and would benefit more from doing like half of what they are, really putting focus into improving that. Also a hot take. Man, these are not the most controversial opinions, you guys. I need some spicy ones for the next one. Yeah, I tend to agree with that. There's kind of two ways you can go. If you have people who are kind of newer to training and they're just kind of going through the motions, usually each set is not within a close enough proximity to failure to really do much. You either need to do a whole lot of working sets, which is where you get some of those more up there volume guidelines, or on the other side of the coin, you need to start stripping back some volume and taking those sets more seriously. And I'm vaguely familiar with like the Menser bros, which I think is really funny because it's like, you're taking a good idea and you're taking it a little bit too far, right? So if someone's never done like really hard working sets and they're doing a bunch of junk volume, you get introduced to this idea of all out sets, and you even just include like 1 or 2 for a body part a week, right? And you're like, wow, I saw more gains from doing that 1 or 2 legitimate hard working sets than I have over the past 3 years of just putting in kind of mundane volume that falls below that threshold of actually being helpful, right? This is awesome, right? But you can't do more than 1 or 2. Says who? What are you talking? Like, yeah, you saw some benefit from this methodology. Like Menser's the man. Look at this. I started doing that 1 hard set and I saw gains. You can do more than those 1 or 2 hard sets per week. It's just physiologically, yes, you can absolutely recover and benefit from it, but people see this a big initial jump up in their progression by going from 0 hard sets to like 1 or 2 per body part, and then for some reason they don't continue that logical progression of feeling out maybe a couple more hard sets. Always think that's super interesting, but yeah, for the most part, I think that a lot of the reason people don't see progression within the gym is that they don't hit that minimum barrier of intensity for the majority of their work sets, whether it be hypertrophy or strength. I see that pretty frequently. Most full body workouts are either overly time consuming or inefficient. Now that's a hot take. It seems like here on YouTube, a platform that I'm still kind of getting to know, that full body workouts are very popular. I think that full body workouts make a tremendous amount of sense if you are training for a different sport, right? And we have to condense our holistic strength and conditioning routine into 2 or 3 weight sessions per week at most, if we're having to juggle that with, let's say, MMA training, for example. In which case, I think they're very effective, and the level of strength you need to reach to reap the benefits of strength and conditioning for sports performance, you don't have to get that strong to really cash in on most of the benefits. Just getting decently strong will get you most of the weight room benefits for a sport, frankly. When I first started lifting, I found, every pound I add to my squat, I'm that much more athletic on the field until a certain point of diminishing returns. And that point of diminishing returns isn't that crazy far into training. And you can kind of get there with full body sessions 2 to 3 days a week. But that being said, if our goals are primarily hypertrophy or strength focused, not for a sport, but just for those outcomes alone, I can't say that I agree with this. I think this might be a cold take, right? So my initial knee-jerk reaction would be like, full body splits are great for beginners, but when you become an intermediate or advanced, then they become less effective, and we need to put in more volume to any one given component of training to get better. And I don't think that's true either. I think my knee-jerk reaction is wrong, right? If we look at powerlifting as an example, SBD days are definitionally a full body day, and those can work all the way from an intermediate lifter to all the way to advanced, beyond advanced, world record holder level. They absolutely can work. They are a bit time consuming, but it is a very efficacious way to hit a good level of frequency on each of the lifts. So let's say we're training 4 days a week. We can fit 4 bench sessions, 3 squat sessions, and 2 deadlift sessions into those using SBD days, and still have 3 days of rest every week, which is a very sustainable model for a lot of people. So I can't say that it's ineffective. It's or inefficient. I think in a lot of ways it is efficient. It allows you to run up additional frequencies while still having a greater number of rest days per week. Another example would be Carlos Reyes, a very good powerlifter in the 242-pound class, said that he saw a big bump up moving from more traditional today is deadlift day split to approaching each training session as a whole body session, allowing him to maybe rest a little bit more per week while still getting in the same frequencies he might want on the main motions. So I can't say I agree with this one. I think that a lot of people do it wrong. And if you have the time to commit to training, I do think some people would benefit from breaking it into upper lower rather than going whole body. But I can't say that it's overly time consuming or inefficient just based on how many people can have success with it. If you're just casually into fitness, maybe it wouldn't be the best use of your time. You'd be better off going upper, lower. But we will say slightly below room temperature take. Not bad. Having a higher ratio of bodybuilding to strength work is beneficial in the long run. So I would call this, this is a hot take. I agree with this. I think that I've talked in the past about how, as you get more advanced as a lifter, the level of specificity that you need to get better rises, right? So when we first start training, any press is going to transfer over to any other press because we're not at a high level in any one motion, right? So inclining is going to be more or less one-to-one with your benching. Add 20 pounds one, the other goes up 20 pounds, right? So we see this great level of transference. We don't need very much specificity to get better. Even doing your tricep press downs is going to yield some pretty direct carryover early on. As we get better, more of our work needs to be focused on the motions we want to be good at. So a greater percentage of our upper body training needs to be benching if we want to be good at benching. And that rises indefinitely. And that's kind of the problem we run into is we see these high level lifters who are already up there and they need to be at a very high level of specificity to get any better than they are. But we copy them even though we're not at that point yet. And that's a very common issue, right? So when we're early in our training career, rather than jumping straight into high specificity when it isn't needed to get better, how about we leave that kind of trump card in our pocket and we use that extra time? We're like, hey, our specificity doesn't need to be that high. We're going to use that specificity to kind of get over a plateau later in training. Well, I've got all this time, this recovery economy. What do? Well, you fill that up with bodybuilding work because like I talked about earlier, the biggest difference between you and someone better than you 9 times out of 10 is the cross-sectional area of the primary movers. So improving that is going to be really important. So generally speaking, what I recommend to people is early on, we have like this, lower level of specificity enough to get better, and we fill the rest with bodybuilding work. And then it's kind of a continuum as you get more advanced. Maybe the specific strength work increases a little bit, the bodybuilding work decreases a little bit up until you get really advanced. And then either you have certain phases dedicated to hypertrophy and then the rest of the time is specific, or it's just mostly specific most of the year. But I would say that because most people who watch YouTube in general, or definitionally, there's more beginner people than there are intermediate people, and there's more intermediate people than there are advanced people. Most of the people hearing this, yes, you should have a pretty high ratio of bodybuilding work within your training, and putting on muscle should be a very high priority. Hot take. It is okay to ignore the smallest weight classes. So I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot we can learn from the smaller weight classes because they don't have this ability to indefinitely put on muscle. A super heavyweights training might look a little different, as it might stay a little bit more bodybuilding centric for a long time because there is no limit to how much muscle you could have hypothetically. Whereas in the lighter weight classes, we have to chase maximal efficiency. And I think there's stuff we can learn from them optimizing their performance without the ability to put on more muscle. How do they continue getting better? It's by, maximizing this neural and tactical efficiency. And I think there's a lot to learn. I guess it kind of, this is a cold take. Back in Washington, I knew a guy, Mikey Estrella, who was the 148 all-time total record holder. Super cool guy, great lifter. Don't ignore him. He's a nice guy. Cold take. Yeah, I don't know. And some people have different definitions of what the small weight classes is. Like, is 73? Whatever Taylor Atwood is that a small weight class? Because you should not be ignoring Taylor Atwood. Absolutely an all-time great who's continually getting better. Definitely shouldn't ignore him, I think. I think there's a thing or two we could probably learn from the guy. Cold take. You're a bully. The next one is RPE 6- is the way. So sub-6 training is the way. This is a sentiment that was really popular a couple of years ago, that the accumulation of submaximal volume is going to be better than maybe higher intensity, less sets work for getting stronger, more sustainable in the long run. And I'm going to say that I don't really have an answer to this one because it's context based, right? So a large percentage of Max's, my brother's training, while we're training for this 2K total is sub 6 by definition, right? It's 4 or more reps in reserve. But that being said, I think that the stronger you get, the more you can get stimulus out of a set that's further away from failure. So a 5 RIR set has a very different implication for max than it does for someone who's weaker. A 5 RIR set for someone who's weaker, I really don't think poses a very significant physiological stimulus. I would say that depends on the phase of training. So if we're in kind of a volume phase or a hypertrophy phase, the accumulation of more submaximal sets is probably better than doing, like, let's just say, here's an example, right? Let's say we're hitting 8s on our bench press. Hitting 5 sets of 8 at 3 reps in reserve is probably a more effective workout than 2 to 3 sets of 8, leaving none in reserve, right? Because we're probably getting a similar hypertrophy stimulus out of the 2, maybe even a little bit more from the volume ones. We're getting less fatigue because we know that the last 2 or 3 reps are disproportionately fatiguing with less stimulus. So it's better to save that fatigue and then do more work sets to make the session hard, because the session does need to be hard. But we're better off accumulating the volume by doing more sets and excluding those final 2 to 3 reps than we are going all out. And then the other problem is early in a training cycle, if we're going to 0 or 1 RIR on our sets of 8, we're kind of drilling bad motor patterns early, and it's only going to get worse from there. So doing a sub-maximal volume accumulation approach to a volume phase also lets us get our technique really dialed in early. So that way, if it does deteriorate a little bit as the weights get heavier, we're starting from a good point. So from a volume perspective, accumulation of submaximal sets, awesome. So maybe sub 6 is the way. I would recommend for most of you guys, I wouldn't go full sub 6. I would usually recommend more around a 7. I think 3 RIR is a good target, maybe even 2 RIR, because a lot of people underestimate themselves. So maybe not sub 6, but we're just going to say generally submaximal volume accumulation. Yeah, awesome for that phase. You'll find that people have different responses in the strength phase. Some people respond great to accumulating, like let's say their sets of 5 at a submaximal RPE. Other people need to push the intensity a little bit. I think that kind of varies. And then we do need to, at some point, we need to go above sub 6, right? We can accumulate all that volume all we want, but at some level, straining against a maximal weight and maintaining technical breakdown or avoiding technical breakdown is specific to the sport, and we need to practice what we want to get good at, and that's heavy singles. So I think that there's some phases of training where no, it's not the way. We're going to go room temperature take. I think that there are phases of training where this might be a good moniker, maybe not sub 6. I think it's a little too far away from me. I think that there's a good podcast. I think it's 2 podcasts with the data-driven strength guys and Mike Tusher, talking about the accumulation of like super submaximal sub 6 volume and the drawbacks as well as the benefits. And I think it's a phenomenal podcast. I think it's on the data-driven strength on Spotify and on the podcast app. Highly recommend you give that a listen. Kind of goes over the pros, the cons. I think it's a great podcast. We'll go room temperature, maybe slightly above room temperature take. So that's all the ones we have for this week. Give me your ones for the next time we do these. If you like the video, leave a like. Thank you guys for watching.